Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Nyren, and I'm the Digital Marketing Manager at the MIT Press. And today I am speaking with two of the creators of the Women of Science Tarot Deck. Both Nadia and Ellen here work at Massive Science, and they're here to tell us a little bit about who they are, what they do, and what this deck is about. So, hi, Nadia. Hi, Ellen. How are you guys doing today?
Great, really happy to be here.
Yeah, really excited to talk about it.
Awesome. We're really excited to have you here too. So to start off, can you tell us a little bit about Massive Science?
Yeah.
Sure.
Why don't you go, Nadia?
Okay, so Massive Science is a community-based science media company. We're about 4 years old now. Alan and I and a lot of scientists basically started this organization as a way to make a place for scientists to learn how to translate science into stories to capture the imagination of the science-curious public. The Women of Science Tarot Deck came explicitly out of this effort on Alan and I and our whole team's behalf. Alan, I don't know if you have another kind of explanation of what Massive is, because it kind of takes on a lot of different roles.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much covers it. We're online. This is our first foray into a non-online setting, and that's been the most exciting thing for us this year.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about this tarot deck itself. It's called the Women of Science Tarot Deck, and I'm going to let you take it from there.
Yeah, the evolution of this product really kind of traces the evolution of Massive. Its origins come from when we were first starting out and we were looking to kind of establish ourselves and our voice and the kinds of stories we would tell. And one of the first projects we started on was called Our Heroes, which was, at its start, I think it was just 10 articles profiling different important women in science throughout history. And as part of this, Nadia suggested, oh, I have this friend, Matteo Farinella, he should do the illustrations for this. And so that happened. And then the articles were really popular. So we said, let's just keep this as a kind of rolling series. And from there, we got suggestions for different people to profile and include. And around, early 2018, we had like 50 or so profiles written, and we thought we should do something more with this. And I think that's when Nadia suggested doing a tarot deck.
Yeah, and actually very early on, everything about Massive is really community-based and networked. And so we thought, oh, a really nice way of seeing if people were even interested in this. I mean, I'm not the first person to say that this is a really weird combination of topics, kind of esoteric, soothsaying, prophesying, historical kind of card game with science. So we wanted to see if people were interested in it. And so we did a Kickstarter and it kind of blew up. And we realized that actually people, yes, they were interested in it, especially educators. And it was a really interesting way of bringing together lots of different communities who might not have otherwise been interested in the same type of game. So that's kind of the Kickstarter really kicked off everything. And here we are today.
Yeah, I bet it's nice to have that validation that your idea wasn't just unique and special to you, that many other people enjoy the same idea. So where did you go from there? How did you go about the process of developing these cards?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe a little bit of a background also in tarot is helpful too for people on this MIT Press talk who might not be super well versed in the history of tarot. So, I mean, I think just writ large, the original purpose of tarot cards, generally, there are many different types of them, and the history is sometimes a little bit messy. But it was to play games. So tarot wasn't originally a way for it wasn't sort of integrated into a lot of different ways of foretelling the future that came a little bit later. The kind of origin story is that playing cards generally entered Europe around the 14th century, and they're most likely from Egypt. It's unclear, but the first records date to about 1367, and they spread really rapidly throughout Europe. And tarot decks specifically were recorded in the 15th century in Milan and different parts of Italy, where you had different trump cards with these allegorical illustrations, which are kind of the closest sort of early tarot deck that we have. And then in the 18th century, you saw a kind of revival of these types of allegorical illustrations, and tarot cards became like one of the most popular card games in Europe. And the earliest record that we have for, tarot being used as a sort of prophesying tool comes from a manuscript from around 1750. And so this idea of tarot being this esoteric tool for seeing into the future it came much later, even though tarot was something that we saw in Europe in the 15th century. We only see that in the 18th century. So I had always been interested in tarot. Alan is really interested in games. The allegorical nature of tarot, I think in the last decade has become really popular. I think there's been waves throughout at least my lifetime, but definitely in the last century of people being more or less interested in tarot. But definitely we were seeing that, and I was becoming interested in my own personal life in utilizing tarot in social settings as a way to kind of tell stories between friends and between new people. And so, as Alan said, we had this idea of making a card game, but the idea of actually making it a tarot game didn't come until a little bit later in the process of making this Women of Science series. And it made a lot of sense. Massive is about storytelling. It's about translating science into stories. Tarot is about translating symbols into stories that you can tell yourself and other people. So we just combined them.
And
Great.
so we had this set of stories and drawings of different women in science, and we had this Kickstarter that we had to fulfill. And then so we started adapting, what we had into the form of the 78 card tarot deck. And Nadia and Matteo did a lot of work kind of making sure that all the ideas aligned. And one new thing we produced out of the process was the whole set of major arcana cards, which aren't about any one specific historical figure, but are about these bigger ideas in science, and kind of more of the philosophy and general history of science.
One of the cool things I think about allegorical images is that you can sort of have thematic allegorical images. And so what we did is we just kind of did more translation of the traditional 22 major arcana, which is a kind of, I would say like a cycle of a person or of an individual or a consciousness, from a fool to the world, understanding everything and being at peace, from a kind of traditional, more like medieval imagery to something that was really contemporary and scientific. So if you look at the major arcana cards in this Women of Science tarot deck, you'll see all sorts of really interesting sort of scientific symbols and a kind of mapping of the original meaning of the cards to the scientific kind of interpretation of those symbols.
That's really cool. I love that combination. So we've discussed it a little bit already, but what do you think is really special about this tarot deck?
I think for me, what makes it really special is that it takes these two worlds that may not encounter each other and kind of put them together. So on the one hand, we have, we've seen a lot of reviews of the deck from people in the tarot community who are excited about it and interested because it's a new take on something they already know. And at the same time, they're learning a ton about science and figures in science history. On the other side, and this is something I took from the process, like I came in knowing a lot more about science and not as much about tarot, and learned a ton about the history of that, the art form of it, and kind of its place in our culture overall.
Yeah, and I think, I think the special thing about this for me is that people are so puzzled by it, because I think that for a long time, humans love to categorize things. We love to like put things in boxes. And I think that the way that we talk about science and the future and history have been kind of disjointed for a long time. science is not devoid of political influence or cultural influence. History can teach us a lot of lessons about how scientific endeavors or discoveries or research have been misused, have caused distrust. We're living in a moment right now during the pandemic where we're actually seeing writ large the result of a lot of distrust of scientific establishments, of power, all of these like big questions that are actually really a part of reading tarot cards, talking about power, talking about pain, talking about suffering and death, but also joy and all sorts of beautiful things. And I think one of the things we realized at Massive was when we're telling stories and when we're teaching scientists how to tell stories to people who are not scientists, they need to kind of channel that emotional valence in the science in order for people to really understand the science. Scientists, I think, and scientific communities have, it's part of the process of science that you're trying to be as objective as possible, that you're taught to be as objective as possible, that you include no emotion, that you strip that all away to try to reach some objective sort of height, in your capacity to transmit information to another person, or from a computer to another computer. But that's not how human brains work. In order to actually process a story or a narrative or information, we need some kind of emotional valence often. And especially if you're not trained as a scientist, you really need that. And so that piece of the storytelling puzzle of building empathy with other people who may not be scientists from the perspective of a scientist is a big part of why I think this is special, because it's a really interesting tool for like reaching across that divide, which is why I think a lot of educators have been really interested in this deck, and also why a lot of parents are interested in it. I think it provides a way to do something that everybody can do, which is tell a story, but also integrate lots of pieces of science and learn about a ton of women that have been kind of brushed under the rug throughout history in terms of their huge role in changing the course of human history. So I think there's a lot of different great things here to kind of to that makes this particular game and this project really interesting. But I mean, I'm biased. I think it's cool because we made it. So
well, I might be a little bit biased too, but I also think it's a really good format for communicating this knowledge. I think, it's exciting and colorful and something that you can interact with. And I think that's one of the best ways to learn really is through interaction and through play also. So, there are a lot of women in this deck. Can you tell us a few of the stories that are featured here?
Yeah. A few of my favorites are some of the oldest stories, some of the more ancient scientists. So on one hand, you have Tapudi, who was the first recorded chemist in Mesopotamia around 1200 years BC. And, she's working in a space where, it's a very early form of science and medicine, and there's a lot of more spiritual aspects that we might not associate more directly today, but that was still a really important role. And then another one further back in history is Hypatia, who really is like one of the first science communicators, where she took math and communicated it more clearly with the people of Alexandria. You can see the lighthouse on that card. So she was just a really important and influential figure, even though I think she's most well known in history for a really unfortunate death.
Yeah, one of the really cool things about sort of gathering together the 56 minor arcana cards, which all feature a woman who, or person who identifies as a woman who's worked in or touched any kind of sort of scientific or engineering or mathematical or physical kind of field of research, both formally and informally, was that we actually called upon our community of scientists and sometimes our readers to tell us about women that we didn't know about, and that are not a part of the sort of canon of the history of science. And that was really cool. And actually, Helen Rodriguez Trias, which is one of the cards, one of my favorite cards, was a suggestion of some folks in our community who are connected to public health and epidemiology. And she was actually an organizer and worked to fight for medical rights for marginalized people. And I think that her inclusion and the inclusion of many, like dozens of other women, came directly from people who really admired these women in their own work as scientists. So yeah, I think that's a cool aspect of it. And actually, a lot of the people who helped contribute to actually write the booklet, which is a part of the deck that has little bios of all of the women. The writing of that book was actually was done by a lot of members of our community who contributed, scientists, writers, and communicators.
That's awesome. So, what's the goal of this deck in your project? What do you hope that the players get out of using it?
I think, Alan, I'll go first, and then I'll let you, because I think everybody has different ideas, I think. I mean, my hope is that through a very different means of communication, i.e. through a game, and it's also embodied and physical, which right now I think we're all missing a lot of, the ability to like sit down with the person and have a conversation in their presence, to be able to actually like hold these cards and play with them and contemplate them and think about them. I hope that people are able to imagine new futures. So to really think about what we've learned and what types of things are possible to imagine a more inclusive future, a future that gives agency to all different types of people, not just like the types of people who we've historically recognized. So that's kind of my hope for how this can be used. And in particular, I think we always built this game with kids in mind, kind of the K-12 community as a way to make something really different for them. So that's kind of my hope, is that it catches on a little bit there.
Yeah, and I think going back to something I said a little earlier, like I really hope that this helps this history of science and understanding of scientific concepts reach a whole new group of people who so far we haven't really reached. Like a lot of our kind of bread and butter storytelling reaches a lot of teachers, other academics, other people who are already interested in science. So coming at this from the perspective of starting from a totally different place, hey, you're interested in this other form of storytelling and art. Here's some stories you might not have heard before. That for me is like the big goal.
Awesome. And speaking of those stories, I know Nadia has a demonstration prepared for us. So are you ready to start that now?
Yeah, I am. I did want to add something very quickly before I start, is that this whole project would not have been possible, obviously, without Matteo Farinella, who unfortunately could not be here today, but he is an unbelievably talented illustrator. He's done all of the artwork for this project and has been kind of a part of the team since the very beginning. His interpretation of the minor arcana is, I think, really brilliant, and we worked on that together, but the execution and kind of a lot of the imagination behind that is through Matteo's artwork. Matteo is also, he's a very talented comic artist who has a number of books out called Neurocomic that really delve into neuroscience, but from a comic perspective. So he is really amazing, and I just kind of want to give him a shout out too before I jump into any kind of reading, because without him and his storytelling capacity, we wouldn't have been able to make this. So.
And I also would like to say that I think the artwork is beautiful and it really makes the deck. So Matteo, wherever you are, thank you.
But yeah, maybe we can do, so there's a couple different, well, there's actually infinite ways that you can tell stories with the deck, which is both, I I think, a little bit overwhelming sometimes, but also exciting. But there's also some really straightforward ways of doing some readings. And we thought that maybe we could do, Alan could ask a question and I could do a little 3-card reading, which there's instructions for in the booklet in the deck. And there are some really open-ended ways that you can read cards. It doesn't have to just be 3 cards. You can continue to pull out cards to help you tell the story or the answer to the question that you're being asked. But we'll just stick with 3 cards, and we'll take them from the major arcana cards only. So these are these allegorical cards that have illustrations that symbolize different kind of transitions of the spirit or the soul, or of, you know, the human species throughout time, as they go from being very foolish and new and not knowing very much to really sort of transcending and understanding how the universe works. So does that sound good? Cool.
That sounds awesome.
So I will, in lieu of any kind of fancy technology, I will hold up the cards as I pull them from this major arcana, these just the 22 cards. The other 56 cards I pulled aside, and these are the ones that have all of the women and are in 4 suits. So Alan, do you have a question that I can help talk through with you?
Yeah, so I'm wondering, how will the next big scientific breakthrough happen? And potentially, what will it be about?
Oh, very interesting. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull the first card, and the way that I do readings, which are maybe different than how other people do readings, are that it's a kind of like Socratic process. So Alan will ask you what you see, and then I'll help interpret it. And usually each card is kind of like a step along the way to answering that question of, can you repeat the question again? Because I've already forgotten.
How will the next big scientific discovery happen, and what will it be about?
Yeah, so how's the next scientific discovery going to happen? What's it going to be about? We'll just go step by step and pull these 3 cards and tell a little story. So the first card is the Justice card. So traditionally, the Justice card there are lots of different kind of symbols that you would see on the traditional Justice card that show kind of scales or balance. But here we've reinterpreted this. And Ellen, what's on this card?
So this is a combination of a few symbols. First, you have a galaxy at the center, and then you have all this kind of life cycle of matter, from like a black hole to a star to a supernova. And then you have the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, in the center. And all of that kind of says, like, conservation of energy. There's no more energy being created. It's all, the whole universe is in balance.
Yeah, so the traditional tarot deck, or my major arcana, have 22 cards, and this is actually the 11th card in the cycle. It's circular, so where you start, you begin. Matteo chose the Ouroboros and to draw on this card as a way of kind of symbolizing that balance of birth and death, and also a sort of understanding that there are rules and laws that govern the way the universe works. Sometimes we understand them, sometimes we don't, but it's all in some kind of balance. I think also traditionally what this card means is it's a kind of transitional card. It means that you're moving from a period of, you've gone over halfway through the cycle. You're moving into a period of new awareness. And actually what happens first is being held to account for things. And when you're being held to account, you're able to restore balance. So I think in terms of, when is the next scientific big discovery going to happen and how is it going to happen? I think what we've witnessed in the past year is that there's a lot of things out of whack with the way in which we are engaging with the world as a species, with the natural world. We're very extractive. Things are really out of balance. I think climate change is in some ways just a symptom of our kind of unbalanced relationship with the world. So I think before what the cards are saying, but also what I think too, is that before anything can change or before we can discover anything that's new or revelatory, we have to remember that there is an inherent balance, you know, in the universe. Entropy is a real thing, and the more chaos we cause, the more we're going to have to exist within that space, and we will have to figure out a way to correct that. So I think that's kind of the first thing that has to happen. It's the first card. And the second card, this is one of my favorites. So this
The
is
Hanged Man.
yeah. So I know you love this card too, Alan. What can you tell us about what you see on this card?
Yeah. So this is really depicting Schrodinger's cat and the idea of uncertainty. Like once you don't know whether the cat is alive or dead until you look inside the box. And when the box is closed, it could be either or. So it's really kind of the unknowability of the future, but also kind of within a prescribed set of outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this one is a really cool one. Just as a little context too, when we were translating the original symbols of the tarot, which this is usually a kind of page figure that is hanging from a tree by his foot, so he's kind of trapped. There's a lot of other symbols in the card too, but that's the primary one. And the card actually means a lot of different things, but is primarily about a kind of sacrifice, that one has to sacrifice oneself. As you can see, this is the 12th card, so it actually directly follows the Justice card. Might have been because I didn't shuffle the pack properly, but because the previous card was 11. But this is a kind of next stage after sacrifice, right? Where, after restoring a balance, where you have to, in order to restore that balance, you do have to sacrifice some element of yourself, or in the case of your question, Ellen, the process of science, there are some elements there's some aspects of how we conduct science, how we do research, how we extract natural resources from the world, how we systematically disadvantage certain people so that others can have more things. We're gonna have to change that, and some people who have a lot might have to sacrifice some things. But when we were translating the symbols, Schrodinger's cat of like sort of not of an unknown, of the sacrifice of not knowing if you should be one way or another and having to make that decision, also mapped nicely onto the idea of animals, you know, sacrificing their lives in the scientific community or the health of our species and our planet for a long time. And now to this day, animals are used in scientific labs and sacrifice their lives so that we can understand the world better. And so there are some nice, like little kind of parallels like that were nice in terms of how we were creating this symbolic allegory. But I would say that as a second step after restoring balance, we're going to have to make some kind of sacrifices that expose, I think, this like unknown, this duality that Schrodinger's cat shows us. Okay, so the next one. So this is in a traditional 3-card pull. The third card that you pull out is kind of like the conclusion of the story. So we have restoration of balance, being called to account for things that have thrown things out of balance, some kind of sacrifice of perhaps a traditional way of doing things in terms of like science and what our next step is. And then we have the moon card. And so this is the 18th card in the cycle of the major arcana. And Alan, what do you see on this one?
So here I see kind of two separate paths to the same goal. I see the space race and the Apollos on one side and the cosmonauts on the other. And that's really interesting to me because knowing how they both had the same goal in mind, but the whole space programs of the US and the USSR took really different approaches and had different values and had different outcomes. So for this, and also the split right down the middle, the kind of balance of it tells me that there's not just one way to get to that point. There's multiple different strategies.
Yeah, and the really cool thing about tarot cards is there's essentially infinite symbols in every card, and this was this was a fun part of making these. Was watching Mateo go down a rabbit hole of understanding and sort of assessing every little piece of every symbol in every tarot card, and there are infinite sort of interpretations of those cards. Very famously, the film director Alexander Jodorowsky got very into esoteric tarot cards, you know, has written a number of books about cards and symbols, has remade one of the original tarot decks. And every single thing, the way that a direction a foot is placed, whether or not there's water, sky, earth in every card, directionality is really important, all sorts of different things. So when he was reinterpreting the original moon card and made this card, he really considered all of that. So Alan noted the stream coming from the sky and bringing water down, which in traditional tarot is interpreted as emotions. Cups and water are kind of emotional realm. The sky realm is an intellectual realm, which we have here. We have the moon and both different phases of the moon. Here he interpreted it as a kind of space race, but there's also a lot of the traditional elements that are still in this card that you'd see in the traditional moon card. The moon card traditionally means like facing yourself. There's some kind of illusion or misunderstanding, and you're forced to kind of reckon with that. And the need to face ourselves and to look at ourselves and to consider, in this case, you know, there was a space race, but it was just humans who were really racing themselves to discover something. Is that race necessary? Do we need to construct a kind of warlike dynamic in order to achieve something, or in order to understand more about the world or discover more about the world? I think that kind of self-reckoning is the final stage before the next big discovery. And I think we're like kind of in the midst of this right now. I mean, we have another space race happening. And I would say there's probably not a lot of self-introspection amongst the folks who are driving that space race. They're not really looking at themselves to understand whether, you know, why they're doing that, who gets to benefit from it. And you know, a lot of other things. So I would say that this is the kind of final stage before before that can actually happen in a way that is, you know, this is what needs to happen before there is a scientific discovery that can really benefit us all. That's what I would say. So I think this is a nice conclusion to that 3-card reading.
Ah, thank you. That was great.
I should warn you, Nadia, before you put away the cards, that one of our questions in the Q&A is another reading.
Oh.
Someone wants to know, and I know you're going to love this question, when will the pandemic end?
Oh God. That's a good one. We can do one more.
If we have time.
Yeah, well, we have another 25 minutes, right? Is that?
Yeah, we do. So we have time, just if you want to.
Cool. So I'm just gonna try to shuffle them. Okay. So when will the pandemic end? Don't hold me to this reading. Remember, it's also just a way to tell a story about this experience that we've all collectively experienced this year, which makes a lot of sense because the first card that comes up is the Tower card. Anybody who's familiar with traditional tarot knows that this is kind of, I think is one of the more fun cards because it really has these dueling meanings. So Hannah, what do you see in this card?
A lot of spooky symbolism. Is that an eye at the top of the tower? Like the Eye of Sauron, or the pyramid on the dollar bill? I see a king and a boat. Mm-hmm. And I see someone drowning, probably a peasant. Right. That sounds about right.
There's also a lot of rain or weather coming down. It's a pretty like apocalyptic scene. There's smoke coming in the background. The tarot card traditionally symbolizes like total destruction, like an annihilation card. And I like the Tower card a lot because oftentimes you can't have growth without destruction. I think that's a complicated way of, or it's a complicated card, can mean lots of things. You can have growth without destruction, but oftentimes destruction leads to growth afterwards is a better way of thinking about it. So I think what we've all experienced collectively this year with the pandemic is just an unbelievable amount of loss and sadness and death. A lot of it was not necessary. We're being forced to see that right now. And through this destruction that's happened over the past year, I think we have some new insight. And I think that, after this destruction, there will be growth. That's the hope. There can be, there also cannot be. But I think, what we're seeing here is power, and those around that power not being able to be saved. And so what Mateo did with this card in particular, as a kind of interpretation of the original sort of Tower card being destroyed, this is a little bit like an academic Tower card where we have those in power, in elite people in a sort of academic sense, dictating what happens outside in this kind of all-knowing way, which is utterly destructive. So this is like the ivory tower a little bit, but
yeah, it is almost ivory. I get that symbolism.
So that's the first card. And then in the second card, we have the Wheel of Fortune. Wheel of Fortune is an interesting card. It's, in this case, this is at CERN here, we have the Large Hadron Collider, which is a really beautiful, I think, metaphor for what is traditionally shown as an actual kind of Wheel of Fortune, with all of the zodiac symbols, the sort of progression of the human spirit throughout its cycle. And I think here is represented like the capacity for humans to really create one of the most unbelievable. I've actually been to CERN before, and I have never seen anything like it in my life. I don't understand how we created it. I know we did it, but it seems it's spiritually profound to see what humans can do when they really put their minds to it. And so I think out of that destruction comes the capacity for us to come full circle, and to really understand how complex the world is and how to end this thing that has caused so much destruction. But it really requires, Large Hadron Collider has required, thousands and thousands and thousands of people to come together in a peaceful way to try to understand some very simple things about how the universe works. I think we have to do the same thing to transcend this pandemic. We all have to come together in that way. That I think probably the field of physics, although it's problematic, conceptually has done the best on a large scale. And then this is a good one. This is the final card of the 3-card pull. I love this card. It's a woman doing her best at I think probably like a smelter, working a really hard job to transform kind of materials from the world into something that gives us more strength. She's strong, and I think there's a lot of different fields right now in and around the idea of climate awareness and planetary health and mental health around our relationship with the natural world. I think those are going to become bigger and bigger fields as we understand how important it is for human beings to sort of mentally grieve things and become stronger through a sort of psychological process of self-awareness. We're losing a lot of the environment. We've lost a lot of our own species. We've witnessed and been a part of a lot of death. And I think we need to build our strength by being more self-aware and coming together. So that's the reading for when the pandemic is going to end. I don't have a specific answer, but hopefully that was helpful for one of the audience members.
Yeah, I think that industrial image for that card is really interesting because I think for this particular reading, there have been a lot of innovations because of the pandemic. So that gives me some hope that that might bring us out of it. Thank you for that. That was really fun. I wish we could do that all day, but it would probably take forever. So we have some more questions that are not reading questions. The first question is from Lee Fury. I love the concept of using major scientific concepts for the major arcana. Can you talk about that decision process?
Yeah, Alan, do you want to talk a little bit about that, or I?
You take it because you were pretty involved you're pretty deeply involved in that, so you can speak to more detail.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's multiple levels on which you can look at the scientific processes that we represent in the transformation, but just to kind of like start from the very beginning, you know, the Fool card, for example, is supposed to be the kind of most naive state of awareness. You're happy and joyful because you don't know any better, and you're just going out into the world and starting to kind of experience the world. So there's not really a lot going on there, but there's also a huge benefit to being the Fool in as much as you don't experience as much kind of pain, things like that. That's a traditional reading. When we translated that to our major arcana, we looked at this particular moment in evolutionary history where animals were leaving the sea and coming to land. It's this like new moment, a new world. They didn't, you know, this evolutionary process, which obviously took, you know, many millions of years, is still this, I think, really nice parallel, or sits in parallel to the traditional Fool card, where we have this creature that is really discovering a world for the first time, hasn't necessarily evolved for land yet, which is a long process. And so trying to understand like what are the benefits and costs of being in the Fool state, what does this card mean? That's kind of how we did that translation process between the traditional cards and the Women of Science tarot cards for the major arcana. Same thing goes for also one of my favorite cards, which is the Devil card. Don't have to tell probably anybody, you know, what these signs mean, but we have, this is a particularly relevant one, I think, for scientists. We have the devil holding the stopwatch in a money bag, publish or perish beneath, and these kind of chained figures beneath the devil, who are holding up some tools of science, but are really, at the end of the day, chained to time and money and publishing. I think, you know, the devil in a traditional deck represents all of the, you know, controlling, powerful sort of modes of being that are really destructive. And I think the same goes in science. We don't often recognize the violence that, you know, time and money present to the scientific process. Oftentimes it's kind of hidden, but it's there and it's important to recognize. So we did, there's a lot of that for all of the different cards, but I think the idea was we were trying to also map the same allegorical kind of transformation from the Fool all the way to an understanding, a holistic understanding of the whole world, which is one of, excuse me, one of my favorite cards. And this world card is, in contrast to the Fool card, is the kind of culmination of our holistic understanding of how the world works, you know, in this case, scientifically. We have this beautiful person in the middle who is a combination of different augmented, abled spaces, who is understanding and looking at the world and engaging with it and changing it as it changes her. So yeah, that's how we did it.
And one thing I'll add to that is we don't have time to go into all of them here, but we do provide a lot of those same readings in the first 20 or so pages of the guidebook. We explain the scientific concepts as well as the more traditional tarot ones.
Fantastic, thank you. And those are some great examples. All right, so we have another question. Is Hypatia the ace of astronomers?
Yes, she is the ace of what we call the astro suit, where for the 4 suits, you have the very traditional tarot suits of the cup, the swords, the wands, and what's the last one, Nadia?
Caught me off guard. Cups, wands, clubs or staffs, and what was the fourth one?
Swords?
And swords, yes. So swords are the mental realms, cups are the emotional realms.
People keep saying pentacles in the chat.
Yeah. Pentacles.
So that was just to say, we've kind of translated those into more scientific concepts. So we have astro, which is like the whole of space and time. It gets smaller looking at the macro, which is more human oriented, anthropology, sociology. We look at micro, which is more about chemistry, and then finally chemistry and biology. And finally, we have like the nano, which is more symbolic and fundamental, like math and computer science. So Hypatia is the ace of the astro, and the way we structured a lot of the minor arcana is the earlier lower numbers. Those cards represent more kind of fundamental research and work that was done. And it kind of ramps up towards the end, the knight, the page, the queen and the king, who did some of the most meaningful, highest impact work in that field.
Awesome. And we have one more question. Does the booklet include a bibliography? I'd really like to read some of the work by the film director you mentioned. I didn't quite catch the name. A list of the sources involved in developing the deck would be much appreciated. I feel like this, I mean, you can answer this question, but it's probably a long one, a long answer.
Well, it's actually, so we have, one of the cool things that we didn't even get to talk about is that we actually have a kind of educational guide for the book. So as part of the Kickstarter campaign, we created a lot of different kind of material around the booklet. There's obviously the long articles that we have published and written on Massive that go into a lot more depth than what you find in the booklet about the history of each one of the women in these cards. So you can actually go to Massive Science and go to Our Heroes, which is our series, or just Google the name Massive Science and the name of the woman on the card, and you can find those articles. Those all have annotations. They have you can dive into that. And one of the other, I think the person might be asking about Alexander Jodorowsky, who wrote a book about tarot and has his own reinterpretation of some tarot, sort of more ancient tarot decks. But yeah, you can find a lot of the additional information, how we made this on Massive's site. Alan, I don't know if you want to add a little bit to that.
Only that's a great suggestion for the next edition.
That is a really good question. You should show us the book a little bit and flip it for fun.
So here is the booklet, which comes in the box with all of the cards. And in the booklet is a little bit of an introduction to tarot, how to play. There's some game layouts here. And then we have, for each one of the major arcana, we have a page that has some information about them, what an upright or reverse card looks like. And then for each one of the minor arcana, there's an explanation of the suits here, because our suits are a little bit, at least the image of the suit is a little different, as Alan said, nano, micro, macro, and astro. And then for each one of the cards in the suit, we have a written description of who the woman was, the meaning of the card, and the kind of takeaway for each card. So when you're learning how to read the cards, you can use them. I mean, the other thing to note is that the minor arcana can be used as just a traditional playing card deck. So you can pull those out from the major arcana, which again are these allegorical cards. and just use them as a regular playing card deck. And then we also have a big thanks to all of our backers who helped this project in its very early stages in the back as well, and how to find more information about the deck online.
That's awesome. I don't know if we mentioned this earlier in the talk, but there's another question about how the women in the deck were selected. How did you pick these particular stories to share?
Ellen,
that's a good question. For the first part, like we really used those suits as a kind of constraint. So we said, okay, we know we need 14 that within each kind of discipline, and that helped give us a kind of starting point of a kind of diversity of fields and subject matter. From there, we relied on either the kind of archive we'd already built up of stories we told, and we also, like Nadia said earlier, solicited recommendations, suggestions to fill out the rest of it. And we even had a few that were contributed by some of the Kickstarter backers. As far as taking that list and narrowing it down further, it really came to who had really interesting life stories, who was maybe unsung and underappreciated in history. We have like Marie Curie in there, but for the large part, most of these are scientists that I wasn't aware of before we started this project, just because they're part of that deeper history that you don't really learn unless you're learning that field specifically.
Yeah, and to add to that too, I think what is often the case is that you have often white women, historically Western women, who kind of take center stage in our understanding of women throughout the history of science. And what we wanted to do was to try to highlight as much as possible a kind of global community of women historically who have stepped into roles as informal or formal scientists. So there's a number of women in the deck who probably were not recognized as scientists at the time when they were doing their work or their research, but who now we would see very clearly as, as a scientist. For example, Janaki Amal, who is an Indian botanist. I don't think at the time she was necessarily recognized as such, but we found her work as a botanist to be really amazing, and she is a scientist, and so we put her in this deck. I think one of the other things we really wanted to do with the deck, in addition to highlighting sort of women all over the world throughout history, is to provide a resource for especially educators who have trouble finding information and stories about these women. When we first started this project at Massive, we would commission scientists, writers to write stories about some of these lesser known scientists. And it's impossible to find information about a lot of them. It just doesn't exist. So they had to do a lot of original research to write the biographies and to source the information about some of these women. And I think that just speaks to the sort of like lack of digital content around women in science that we were trying to kind of fix with, or not fix, but create a kind of additional resource. So that when you do Google one of these women's names, you're not sort of searching through like subpar websites where you can't tell whether or not the information is valid or not, but you could come to Massive and find valid information in the stories of these women. So that was another kind of piece that drove us to choose certain types of women to be a part of the deck.
Thank you. One more question, and then I think we're done for the day. How do you hope scientists might use the deck? Or, what have you heard about the deck from scientists so far? How do you think they're using it?
Let's see, you'll have to give me a second.
Yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of different scientists like, well, they've reached out to us to tell us that they love this because they didn't know about a lot of the women in the deck, because it's also cool to see scientific concepts kind of mapped onto spiritual concepts. I think this is like a really grotesque thing for a lot of scientists who insist that there's no emotional aspect to the work that they do or to the motivations that they have in doing the work they do. I apologize for the ambulance. But I think a lot of scientists, especially younger scientists, have a really strong understanding of the emotional biases that drive their work and drive other people's work, how science is a subjective endeavor. We can attempt to try to make it objective. And so I think that's been the response, is kind of like, actually, this is a really fun thing. And we're enjoying kind of playing with it and using it as like a tool to, like, a fun, lighthearted way of engaging with issues that are actually really heavy in the scientific community, and also within just science as a cultural part of how we operate as a species.
And I would say one of the real motivating forces behind what we're doing is really taking a practice-oriented approach, where for all the scientists in our community, we don't just want to give them a book to read and a test to take and say, okay, now you're a communicator. Like we work with them over the course of months to develop a pitch and edit a story and get it out. And we've seen over the course of doing a few of these that it does actually work, and they are practicing storytelling, and it's having an effect on their ability to talk about the work they're doing or the work that's happening out in the world. So I see this in some ways, especially for people or scientists in our community, this is a way to easily pick up and practice storytelling about science. You start with a main character, you have a little bit of a narrative, start, middle, end, and just continually building those skills is the best way to get all scientists more comfortable talking about the really kind of difficult, specialized stuff that they're doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. It's been really fun to have you here. And honestly, I've already bought a copy as a gift. So if anybody else wants to buy a copy, we have the link to our page on our website in the chat, as well as a blog post about all the different places you can find books and tarot decks this time of year, and also the full collection of all our MIT Press live events and videos. This chat today will be turned into a video and posted online next week. So if you missed the beginning, or if you want to share it with your friends who couldn't make it, we will have it on our blog at mitpress.mit.edu next week. And thank you again, Nadia and Alan, for joining us today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we check out?
Just thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you for, I know there's probably some folks who are part of like both the tarot communities, who are readers or who really enjoy or love tarot, but also scientists and people who love science. This is just our like kind of wacky attempt to merge all of the great things about all of those different ways of kind of being and seeing and investigating the world. So I know it's strange, but we really appreciate your support, and yeah, and go out and buy a deck for somebody you love.